I think it's a very thoughtful on his part to bring into focus an agenda which has not been, getting favors from the academicians and theoreticians of late, particularly in an era where relevance of academic knowledge to the world of practice is being brought into the primary focus. Everyone wants to do something which is immediately useful and immediately relevant. Theory building is a kind of long drawn process which requires certain amount of abstraction, certain amount of understanding of reality in a more abstracted form than into the concrete forms. But the demand, the pressure for skill training, for relevance, for job opportunities, for controlling and explaining the phenomena, which is the very typical characteristics of the market economy in which we are living. Now, theory building particularly is very critical, and if you look at the history of OB, you will find that there are theories and there is a phases where there has been mushroom growth of theories, but all theories suffer from what is being referred by one thinker as a toothbrush phenomena. What is a toothbrush phenomena? He says that toothbrush is one kind of thing which no respectable person wants to use others' toothbrush. Same casualty is happening to the theories. It's suffering from the same toothbrush, phenomena, because each one wants to give a particular kind of theory. As a result, there has been mushroom growth of theory. Now, I would be sharing my thoughts on primarily two aspects. One, what are the general guidelines for theory building in general? And second, how this theory building is being tried out into the behavioral sciences, particularly into organizational behavior, with particular reference to. And first, so I'll begin by looking at the phenomena of theory building, what theory is all about. Because theory building research can be divided primarily into two. One is the theory building research and the application oriented research. Theory building research primarily takes on its agenda carefully defining concepts, stating the domain, and explaining how and why this relationship exists. As you know, that the primary task objective of doing research is to find a connection between two concepts, two phenomena, two experiences, at least minimum into that, so that we start looking at the patterns. And once we are able to see the patterns, can we also make certain kind of predictions about the regularity of these connections? Can this association last long? There is, or they get affected by certain kinds of factors. So what could be those factors? We can think about it. So I'm afraid my talk is going to be a bit dry, slightly abstract, a bit philosophical, and sustaining this kind of a talk could be a challenge. And I'm sure the audience would be, since they have subjected themselves to such a program, so they are ready to sustain this kind of a dry lecture, which is more talking about the concepts and theories. Basically, the function of theory, and as you know, that the function of a theory is to predict the occurrence of a specific phenomenon. How can we predict? Because the prediction and control, they are the two very powerful objectives of doing any kind of science. You can question it based on the philosophy and ethics, that why should we control? Why should control be the agenda? But I think human being because of its own claims of supremacy over the knowledge systems, over their capacity of imagination in comparison to other species, and those who are engaged into the world of knowledge, they want to predict the phenomena. And you know that the many, this is the most powerful tool available with the mankind. Theories, particularly scientific theories, most powerful invention of human being, starting from Copernicus to heliocentric theories, to Darwin's theory of evolution, to the Einstein theory of relativity. This has given us tremendous amount of power and control over explanation, over descriptions, and over prediction of many phenomena, many kinds of events that have taken place. The problem with the organizational behavior is that there has been a crisis, theory crisis, particularly into social sciences and into the organizational or the management sciences, theory crisis. What are those reasons and why this has been happening? That we'll talk about it. But first, look at the power of a theory. Theory is a very powerful tool for predicting and subsequently controlling the phenomena. If you can predict, we can also control. Has it been achieved into the organizational behavior or not? How many theories are available, whether you look at the theories in organizational behavior, whether it is related to motivation, leadership, environmental changes, or any other kind of a thing, how many have enabled us to actually predict and control? And the answer is not very satisfying. The same is called as the toothbrush problem. No self-respecting will use another theory, self-respecting person. So they would like to. So what was created? We are living into a theory-rich bubbles. There are multiple theory-rich bubbles that have taken place. My thought on this are based on certain kind of readings, and it is after a very long someone has asked me to share my thoughts on a theory building. How theory helps us predict, because if we are able to do the prediction, right? Now, what is the process of building a concept and its relationship that shows how and why a phenomena occurs? Long back, if you look at uh, the work of theory building, and I'm reminded here the William James in 1907 made, we develop kind of a theory to look forward, so that what likely to be happen in the future we can predict here. And on occasions, we and this theory building, that's the two concepts, two phenomena, two kinds of events which are happening in certain patterns. How can we identify the patterns, and can this pattern help us build stable connections or stable associations? And if you are do it, then we can say it. Now, after this primary introduction, we can now define theory. That theory is basically a set of statements. Theory is a set of statements that serves to explain the manner in which certain concepts or certain variables are related. What would be the way of relating certain kinds of variables that is going to be predicted, controlled, and understood by a theoretical formulation or a theory? First, theory helps us organize the knowledge. That's the first very important point of view. Look here, I'm sure the audience would be listening, that what is the difference between information, data, and knowledge. Here I'm talking about the knowledge. I'm not going to explain this, what is the difference between, maybe later we can do it. But theory helps us organize the knowledge, right? It is also the second important function is theory helps us identify the patterns of relationship, that in which pattern this relationships occurs. Look here, only in the background of the patterns we are able to identify the exceptions. There are so patterns exists at the background to identify that what kind of exceptions are likely to occur, which are not falling into that kind of a pattern. So this is the second function. Patterns of relationship can be identified, right? And third, then it leads to meaning, or to a series of different phenomena, right? So it creates finally a structure of understanding. Theory creates a structure of understanding to identify, to organize our knowledge, to identify the patterns of relationships, and also according meaning to the series of uh, observations. That what kind of observation that we have done it. The another important function, the fourth one of a theory, is that it helps us summarize diverse findings. If you have a very diverse kind of a findings, and if you have a theory, then we can organize it. I'll take one example. Whether you take motivational theories of Maslow need hierarchy theory, or you take the Elderford ERG theory, or you take, for that matter, the leadership theory. There has been wide range of research is being done onto this, and many theories have been formulated, starting from authoritarian leadership to democratic, to leader follower leadership, to contingency leadership, and different kind of things that have taken place. A theory also enables us to handle large amount of empirical data with relatively few propositions. We can handle a large amount of data with theoretical propositions. And if one wants to read in detail about various other functions of a theory, there's a very interesting book by Shaw and Costanzo, which I had studied during my post-graduation classes. It's published in 1970. Theories in social psychology. That's the theory. Now, what is a good theory, and why this good theory is becoming a rarity, becoming a casualty into the organizational behavior sciences? The theory, good theory, and which I am referring to the work of Kaplan, which is written a book which is known as The Conduct of Inquiry. My references are slightly older, but this I find are the classical works on the theory. What is a good theory? And he says that the good theory, the first characteristic of a good theory, and then whether the theories that we are talking about in terms of constructing a theory, and finally I will talk about that what are the steps of constructing a good theory, and why in a contemporary research this is becoming a kind of a serious casualty. It is not happening the way it should happen. The first important characteristic of a good theory is that there has to be internal consistency, right? So it means that there is a propositions which are central to a theory are free from internal contradictions, right? This is also a bit of philosophy, and I'm sure those who have interest into philosophy of science, they know and understand that what do you mean by internal consistency. So if you have a different kind of a propositions into a theory, then this proposition should be free from certain kinds of contradiction. This is called the internal consistency. This is the first important characteristic of a good theory. The second important characteristic of a good theory is that it has to be externally consistent. Means this proposition of a theory and the new observations which are happening into the real world, whether it is able to accommodate and assimilate, yes, accommodate and assimilate these new observations. And if it is able to do that, this is called the externally consistent theory. The third important characteristic of a good theory that Shaw and Costanzo has talked about is that the scientific parsimony. And we know that law parsimony is a very powerful law into the science, which is the best word in Hindi which I can remember. Is called the Mityavyayita ka Siddhant. Means whatever words are necessary, whatever expressions are essential, and each sentence must give a certain kind of information, right? We should avoid redundancy. and surplus meaning. The law of parsimony, which is called scientific. So scientific parsimony is the very important factor into building a scientific theory. So we should avoid unnecessary words, words which are not informing, which are not carrying a different kind of a meaning, right? And we use what is a necessary, right? मितव्ययिता मीन्स जहाँ जरूरत हो वहीं पर उन शब्दों का प्रयोग किया जाए. We cannot use the words, in a profusely redundant way, because that will be a disqualification to a good theory. The fourth important characteristic of a good theory is its generalizability. Generalizability is quite a contested point into theory, particularly in organizational behavior or in social sciences in general. That's the how this generalizability means whatever understanding, whatever phenomena we have been able to observe, how far they can be generalized, they can be made to apply on wide range of phenomena into the similar kind of a domain. So is it offering that generalizability? Now, here is many point of a debate. He said that the generalizability, and why it is not happening, we all know it. The way it is happening into the sciences, particularly in physical sciences, this is not happening, and the reasons are known to almost everyone, because the phenomena that we study in organizational behavior or in social sciences, this phenomena is quite fluid. It is not very persistent, and a lot of factors of time, space, which is called the contextual factor or the situational factor. It is also contingent upon that who is the observer and depending on the observer's perspective. So since there are multiple factors which are very difficult to control, and therefore the generalizability often becomes a casualty in a good. But when we are proposing a good theory, we are also expecting that its generalization capacities would be quite wide ranging and applicable. So the principle of universality, which is the fundamental principle of a science, a requirement of a science, that what a phenomena is studied here and what a phenomena is studied somewhere else, can be explained by the same tools, concepts, and connections. Now, that's why it is becoming quite a contesting issues. And finally, the good theory, where there is a verifiability. We can verify. Good theory presents proposition that can be tested, right? That can be studied. When we are teaching a research method or talking about it, we often face a problem that how to identify a problem, a research problem. What is a good problem? And we often, give certain kind of a consideration to problem in a research is a researchable, whether this particular agenda or this particular topic is a researchable or not. That's the way. And researchability is identified on the basis of three considerations. One, that there is a gap in the knowledge. We don't know the answer. We have the question, but we don't have the answer, right? Suppose you have to ask the questions that why people coming to the power starts behaving like their predecessors. This is the one important question which often cross my mind. What power has to do, changing the personality? So people are very nice before they come to the power, but when they come to the power, are the structural arrangements within the domain of a power predispose them to behave in a particular manner, and they all starts behaving almost in a similar way? They can only vary on the scale of authoritarianism or the scale of something. Suppose this kind of propositions you have. So if you have to select a leader in the organizational, what kind of a leader would fit into the given schema or the organizational structure? So one problem, there is a gap. We don't have answer to this question. And since we don't have answer to this question, so power leader relationship in what way? There are
अब
different
देखिए,
kind of
अगर आप बताओ कि आपके राजा के पास कुछ नहीं है, ना हथियार है।
Yes, please go ahead.
Vijay sir, you want to say something?
Please ask. That will make the interaction interesting. Otherwise, it becomes very drab. Please go ahead. Whosoever was asking this question.
I would like to inform all the participants that the chat is also open. If you wish to raise any questions or anything, you can put it in the chat box also, or you can raise your hands, unmute, and ask sir as well. Thank you.
Yes. Or you can we will just completing this five characteristic of a good theory: internal consistency, external consistency, scientific parsimony, generalizability, and verification. I can stop and then wait for a certain kind of questions
Sure, sir.
if you have any. Okay. So verifiability, I was talking about that, how the verifiability notion, the problem where there is a gap, this is the one. So I have a question and I don't have answer, right? So I can do it. For example, there was a question that a student coming from a deprived background of the society, uh, right? They have a greater motivation to make their mark and achieve success in comparison to those who are coming from well-to-do background. And this is based on one kind of a data that you take the list of the toppers. In the particular, the majority of students are coming from relatively deprived background. Suppose this is my observation that I have noticing, looking at the data. So I want to understand that whether the deprivation has certain motivation inducing characteristics. People who are coming from a relatively not well-to-do background, those students are high achievers in comparison to those who are coming from well-to-do background. Suppose this is a kind of a, now I want to verify it, and my theoretical proposition seems to be that deprivation also is a motivational induce, which has been referred as a kind of adversity hypothesis. So people who are subjected to certain adverse kind of situations, they develop certain tenacity to fight, to struggle, and make their mark. And number of instances, number of examples, number of phenomena, number of experiences are available to us to look into this phenomena. So there may be a gap. Or for another situation where the problem deserves verification or researchable proposition, is that there are two answers to the same question. Some answer says that, well, you cannot have a generalization that people coming from deprived backgrounds are relatively high achiever despite that kind of a thing. Someone say that no, it has nothing to do with the deprivation, it has to do with certain other kind of factor. So there are contradictory, there are multiple answers available to question, and you want to reduce the number of alternative questions available to you through your research, then you have a researchable proposition. This is the one situation. The third situation where a problem is taken as a researchable problem is when there is a explanation available, there is a fact available, experience available, but how do we explain, how do we understand it? Because the ultimate objective, or one of the major objectives of doing knowledge activity, is to understand, is to know things, right? So there is a fact, but there's not an explanation. So for conducting that explanation, you may carry out a research. Now, verifiability demands that you have to have hypothesis, that how this hypothesis testing game, particularly in management sciences, has been counterproductive actually to the theory building exercise. That's the second thing that I'd be talking about. So if you are looking, evaluating a good theory and looking at a good theory, these are the five important characteristics that we have to keep in mind. There is a very known and philosopher of a science, which is a Nagel. Nagel is the name, and Cohen and Nagel's book, Introduction to Logic and Scientific Inquiry. This is a very famous book by Cohen and Nagel. It's 1943 book. Nagel makes a very, very interesting statement. And when I was was doing my pre-PhD courses at that time. I'm talking about almost 45 years ago. I still remember one quote that if you are looking for a phenomena into the real world, it has the view from somewhere. There cannot be an observation from nowhere. So where are you located? From where you are trying to look at, right? Theory or the conceptual framework, if I use a substitute word, conceptual framework gives you the necessary ground or the anchor point to look at a phenomena in a particular way. So Cohen and Nagel, they are making, into that, it's very important that we locate ourselves into certain kind of a perspective. For example, if you look at the work of many, particularly since I come from psychology, so my examples have a lot of psychology. There is a book by Ellen Rowland, In Search of Self in India and Japan. And Ellen Rowland has talked about that, like every researcher, I had my own conceptual baggage. Now, what is my conceptual baggage? We always, take a view that as a researcher, it is very important that we become aware of our conceptual baggage. That whether we are liking this particular theoretical orientation, we have a preference for a particular, the knowledge system. In certain kind of a thing, like in history, political science, even in the literature, it is often asked that this is a leftist viewpoint, this is the rightist viewpoint, right? So whether your viewpoint is located into a particular kind of ideology, whether particular or in psychological sciences, we often say that, or even in the OB sciences, we often say that this is a very psychodynamic view. What do we mean by when we are saying the psychodynamic view? Psychodynamic view generally refers to the work of psychoanalytic thinkers like Freud, Adler, Jung, Karen Horney, Eric Fromm, different kinds of a psychodynamic. It means that it is a view from a particular perspective that certain kind of a thing which have happened in the past have a bearing on our behavior in the present, right? So he said that we have to have a view from somewhere. You can't explain phenomena without a view from somewhere. And what is that somewhere? It's within quotes. That is very important for a researcher to be familiar with. Doing research that is useful for doing practice. And that's what he say, that unless we know that where are we positioning ourselves, where are our anchors, where we are standing, what is the ground, right, where we're keeping our feet. In OB sciences, particularly since the theory building is talked about on organizational behavior, there is a very interesting kind of explanation given by Lawler. Lawler is a thinker into OB research, and way back in 1985, he said that managers and researchers both use generally 4 kinds of techniques. When I was trying to prepare my talk for this, I came across very interesting formulation. He said managers as well as researchers, they are often using 4 kinds of techniques for understanding a phenomena, for controlling it, regulating it, and converting into a practice. What are these 4 techniques? The 4 techniques that they talk about is, one is called the tenacity. Second one is called the intuition. Third is authority, and fourth is actually doing science. I would be referring more to the fourth one. Let's understand what is the tenacity. Managers and the researchers, they often believe that whatever they know, right, when they form a belief about a phenomena, right? Take for example, I have a belief that satisfied employees perform better. If, say, principal thinks in your college or whatever college you are teaching or university you are teaching, the head of the institution thinks that if my teachers, if my employees remain satisfied, right, they would perform better. So happy employees perform better. This is just a belief, right? Now, if we are holding this particular belief despite contradictory informations, then it is, and yet you want to continue with the same formulation, keeping employees happy, and yet performance is not improving. This is called the managing by tenacity. You are trying to understand, you are just trying to search for the evidences to confirm your own belief. Whereas all the data and information which is coming to you is not in sync with your belief. It is in contradiction with your belief. So this is called the tenacity. This is often that's the takes place. And more tenacious a person is, more confident we feel, right? So please check next time. So as a researcher, when we are doing the science, we also learn to question that what are my beliefs about a particular phenomena? What do I understand? Is my job as a researcher, as a theory builder, is to confirm, look for evidences which confirms, which is called in other terms the experimenter's effect. I am expecting my participants to behave in a particular manner and they end up behaving the same way. So somewhere my position gets vindicated and I feel that, well, I have achieved what I intend to achieve. So this is a very important part. But managers and researchers both use this tenacity. We often go with a hypothesis in our hand and searching for its confirmation, and very rarely for the rejection. Though when we are formulating, whether null hypothesis or a directional hypothesis, so tenacity becomes an important tool for making a claim to understand a phenomena and then trying to use it for theory building. The second important aspect of this practice, the managers and the researchers, is called intuition, right? Intuition, we all understand the meaning of intuition, and it has been received tremendous amount of attention, particularly in psychological sciences, that how intuition is formed and how it is. But here is not the occasion to discuss about it. When a researcher or the manager, practicing manager, feel that answer is self-evident, right? And he has certain kind of hunch to solve a problem, and he's only looking for evidence to prove the hunch, that hunch is right, then we are relying too much on intuition, right? Intuition is not about the insight. We'll talk about the insight later, which is a very important part of a theory building, but we often take intuition as a substitute for true knowledge. We understand, and this is what we often do. So I have a feeling that I know the answer to the question or answer to a problem, that how it can be solved, and we move ahead in this direction, right? Now the third, which is often used to solve a problem or to deal with certain kind of a situation, is the idea of authority, expertise, right? Now here in the contemporary world in which we are living, expertise is a serious casualty. I don't think experts are now respected, because it is the popularity which is becoming a more important ground for accepting or rejecting any kind of a thing. I don't know, which is one of the fallouts of the democracy or other. If you have floated an idea on social media platform, and if there are too many takers for this particular idea, right, then you have the expertise. Expertise in the classical sense of the term comes from hard labor, where you are invested acquiring certain kind of knowledge in a particular field, right? Where you have toiled, where you have, what if I use the phrase, you have burned your midnight oil, right? And have tried to understand phenomena. And after years of this kind of investment, you have been able to develop certain kind of understanding of the phenomena. Then only the expertise comes. Within the expertise range, right? He has the experience. Okay. He has consultants come with certain kind of expertise, certain kind of understanding, and then they do it. But contrary to this, but all these three have also given certain kind of a background, right? The tenacity, the intuition, and the expertise have given certain kind of background for a theory formulation in organizational behavior. But the best theoretical formulation will come by engaging in a science, which is the fourth one. So tenacity, intuition, authority, and finally doing the science. And doing a science means we are doing something which is very objective, fact driven, which is a free from subjectivities. Now here there is a catch in organizational behavior. How do we achieve objectivity? And if you look at, because I have been teaching, I have been teaching qualitative research for the last 2 decades. And I often come across this criticism that qualitative research is not an objective research. So I started looking into the literature that what are the ways and what are the mechanisms by which social sciences, particularly management sciences and behavioral sciences, these two, are basically addressing the issue of objectivity. And I came across a very beautiful quote by a great thinker, Guilford, which is written a book on psychometric methods, who is big time into the measurement and assessment, because mathematics is considered to be the most objective language, and more mathematical formulations you use in your theory building, the greater probability of its robustness is ensured. So if you are using a particular kind of a theoretical formulation, you are expected to go in a mathematical way. And these days into computer modeling way, or for that matter, structured equity modeling way, for achieving these kinds. So objectivity, doing finally the science, how do we do objective science? So Guilford says that in social sciences, particularly the objectivity is achieved by interpersonal agreement. Here I am underlying the word interpersonal agreements. Means the greater agreement of the multiple subjectivities taking place on a particular point, there is a greater probability that the phenomena will turn out to be objective. Great. That sounds pretty, workable, because that is what we are doing when we are conducting surveys, when we are doing field observations, when we are doing the field studies, different other kinds of things that we are doing. Then this is the what we are achieving within that, right? Now here, how uh, this particular occurrence is independent of a personal opinion. That's the objectivity. Is it free from certain kind of predilections and biases? That's the objectivity, right? Is it totally independent of subjectivities, personal opinions, personal viewpoints, right? Or preferences? It is always data driven. Data driven reality, which is being talked about. That's what the kind of a science. So the people who are into looking into the theory building and the theory formulations in organizational behavior, they often suggest that it is good that we do science. We are not either doing it as a tenacity, as a kind of intuition, or using any authority. But if I am proposing something which is more objective, which is free from personal opinion and biases, which can stand the test of independent examination, independent observers, right? And it can be subjected to repeatability. I can repeat it. If you do it, you can repeat it. And it is universally true. That's the ideal that we finally wish to achieve, to do that. But in organizational behavior sciences, the whole claim of universality, despite the theoretical bubbles that we have created, are very little and very few, right? Except in social sciences, and which is called the behavior modification Skinnerian paradigm in psychology, which says that positive reinforcement is strengthen the occurrence of a behavior. Here I would like to stop, and if you have a question before I move to the next stage, which is called what are the stages of theory formulation in OB, then we will talk about it. If there are questions, I'd be happy to take them without any promise that I would be able to answer them. No questions?
Sir, this is Ram Kumar from Coimbatore. Can I ask my questions?
Please. Please.
Sir, in theory, I mean, the definition of theory, you mentioned about there are 5 characteristics mentioned by Kaplan. So one is generalization. So, but in the case of qualitative research, our aim is not to generalize. So can't we call it as a theory, sir?
Well, that's a very good question. In qualitative research, the objective of a research is not generalization. And the objective is also to give you the background for raising a hypothesis. A qualitative research gives you an idea, a background for raising a hypothesis. How do you raise a hypothesis? What is the background? And what are the characteristics of a good hypothesis? And that is the one. So qualitative research can also lead to the theory, but the process, you're familiar with the two processes, the process of induction and the process of deduction, right? So whether it is doing a kind of induction, which is called inductive research in qualitative research, which is good enough for you to raise a robust hypothesis. What are the characteristics of a good hypothesis? A hypothesis is a proposition or is an answer, suggested answer to a problem. Hypothesis is a suggested answer to the problem. Second, the hypothesis must be subjected to testing. This is the one. Third, which is a very important and most critical characteristic of a hypothesis, this hypothesis must be in consonance with the knowledge systems available in a particular kind of a domain. So in a particular kind of a domain, how do you generate the knowledge? Let's look at certain phenomena. Since you asked the question, look at the theory of Maslow, the need hierarchy theory, or look at the theory of job satisfaction, Herzberg and others, or for that matter, theories of the motivation. Most of these theoretical formulations came out of the qualitative research. And they became quite an important theoretical formulations, which have been subjected to all kind of evidence generating exercises. Some of them have been proved, some of them have could not be proved. But this qualitative research became a good basis. Look at the psychodynamic theory. The whole of the psychodynamic theory, psychoanalytic theory, is based on the qualitative research, right? So your point is very valid. That even if you are not taking the, that's what I said in the beginning, the generalizability is a contested issue. You remember that. And these were the examples I had in mind when I put it into the contestable, criteria. There is a possibility that qualitative research can lead to a theoretical formulation. I'm using the word theoretical formulation or a conceptual framework to raise hypotheses, to formulate hypotheses, which can be subjected to further empirical verifications, leading to a possibility of generalization. But it is not always achieved. That's the answer that I'll have to your question. Am I answering your question?
Yes, sir. So can I conclude that we are doing qualitative research only to develop hypothesis, and it has to be tested further to call it as a theory? Am I correct, sir?
Right. Qualitative research we are doing first, not only to raise a hypothesis, we also to understand a phenomena. This is the one. Second, if the phenomena is so very unique, look here, phenomena is so very unique that because of its uniqueness, you are drawn to it. And third, the existing methodological tools are not. Suppose you want to collect the stories of operation, collect the stories of suppression by the different kind of power systems and the power structures. and you find that the existing methodological tools are not sensitive to allow me to get full access to these stories of repression and suppression, and therefore I decide to do a kind of a qualitative research. Here the uniqueness or the specific nature of the problem that you want to investigate will give you good enough data for you, right, to create a hypothesis. So I would like to see qualitative and subsequently quantitative both in a complementary manner. Qualitative will generate you raise a hypothesis, and if you want to take that hypothesis to the level of theory building and theory development, then you will have to muster, you will have to gather furthermore empirical evidences to find support of the theory, which may lead finally or may not lead to generalization. So your understanding is right, that it is primarily used, qualitative research, to raise hypotheses which can be subjected to further empirical verification.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Should we move ahead? Okay. What are the different? Yes. Mr. Arun, Anthony.
Yeah. So in the organizational behavior, so what do you think? What adds value, or what's generates real valuable insights? Is there a preference for qualitative over quantitative? Can we say something like that?
Well, okay, let me try. It's not a question of recommended preference. I would rather put it in this way. First, I think it is important to decide what do you want to study. What is more important? We often, there's this kind of problem, when students coming to the PhD program, they often ask that before you decide the methodological paradigm, it is very important that we decide about the ontological paradigm. You decide about the question that you wish to answer. So first decide what you want. And second, you decide how do I get it. It's as simple as that. Now deciding what do I want. Take for example, if you want to know that how many people are sitting in this class. Suppose that's your question. The best answer is go for a head count. But if your question, you are more interested in the question that what kind of people are sitting in this class. Of course, you can't do it. You can't answer this question by head count. You will have to go into certain other process, certain other mechanism. So my response to your question is that in organizational behavior, you want to, suppose take for example, you want to know that what makes a good leader, or is this person which is at the verge of receiving or getting promotion for the next post, the leadership requirement that he will have to do more of people management, he will have to do more of policy implementation, he will have to do more of coordinating with the higher ups. Suppose these three very important characteristics, will he able to do that? Right? And people of this kind know to do that. Now, if your question is very specific to a particular phenomenon or a particular issue, then you will have to decide that what is that I want to know. Do I want to know that what makes a good leader at a particular post, right? So you are searching more for a generalized answer, or you are searching for a very specific answer to a very specific problem. If you are searching a specific answer to a specific problem, then I would suggest qualitative research first, and followed by its generalization possibilities to a quantitative research. So depending on the nature of a question that you have, nature of a problem that you want to address, I think your choice would be dictated by that. And then only the method question comes. Here I am not going into the ontological debate. Ontological debate is that what is my understanding as a researcher about the reality? Is a reality out there away from me, and this can be subjected to certain empirical verification? This is the one position which is called the very, very positivistic position, or the position which is independent. The second position can take another viewpoint. It can say that, well, all realities that exist and that matter to me only exist in relation to certain observers. All realities are mediated by the observers. If there are no observers, no reality can be understood. Suppose this is your position as a researcher. Now, naturally, if your first ontological position is accepted, and both are equally valid positions, there is no way of rejecting that, so no, this is not true and this is not true. Which phenomena is very important? Take, for example, this pandemic situation. And many students of mine are doing a kind of a research on the victims of this, that what kind of a psychological problems people suffering from victim in their family member. So primary caretakers, what kind of psychological distress primary caretakers have failed, right? So this is being done by collecting the interview, or once interview is done, then maybe perhaps later on a more structured questionnaire would be done, because we essentially believe that the COVID victim experiences are very unique to that particular person. And unless we go close, unless we collect those experiences through their lived reality, and here I am putting it in inverted commas, lived reality, lived experiences. So for me, the lived experiences is a far more stark reality than the experiences in general. So if your ontological assumption is that no, COVID trauma exists independent of the experiencer, the second position can show that no, COVID trauma cannot be understood without the going into the lived world of the experiences. These two positions will demand two kinds of approaches to the qualitative research. The best answer can be obtained in synthesis of both, that's beside the point. But depending on the nature of a question that I have and nature of assumption about the reality, your research proposition or further theory building can be done. So this is what has been in organizational behavior researches. If you look into the history of it, whether you are starting from Levine to Abraham Maslow to Hirschberg to leadership theories of Porter Lawler, or any other contingency theory of the Fittler, or any other, you will find that majority of these theoretical formulations have born out of their qualitative research, their understanding from their own observational capacities that they have been subjected to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arun. Yes, is there any other question? Okay, if there are no further questions, or you can think of the question and you can shoot later. Let's look at what are these four stages of the theory building in organizational behavior. First, which is very important, that the observation in real world. That's what I was referring to. And this observation in real world is a very, very powerful. And in fact, we train our own students in sharpening their observational capacities, how their observational capacities can be sharpened. Believe me, most of the inventions and discovery, even in the science, most of this have not occurred on the labs. They have occurred outside the lab, whether you are looking at the Newton or looking at the Archimedes or looking at the Marie Curie or looking at the any kind of. So observational capacities are very, very powerful into that, right? So what kind of observation you have into the real world, and whether your observation, take for example, I'll give very interesting here an experience of Argyris. You must have heard his name. Argyris, Chris Argyris. Chris Argyris was born in 1923 in Newark, New Jersey, in USA, and his parents was a Greek immigrant, Chris Argyris. And Chris Argyris in 1951, at the age of 28, he got his PhD degree from Cornell University at the age of 28, right? And currently he was last known He was a faculty in the Harvard University, Graduate School of Business. Chris Argyris has written an autobiographical article, very interesting article, Reason and Rationalizations. Chris Argyris. And this article is full of learning and is studied. And that's the one example which connects us with this own power of observation, that how this power of observation led him to work in this particular kind of an area. And he observed in 50s, immediately after the Second World War, that the managers and the people in the organizations, particularly the World War, they, as the slogan was given to them, that we are fighting this war to liberate the world. But Chris Argyris noted, right, that the experience in their organizational life is much more constrained than liberated. Now look here. The overall ethos that's created is that the world war is going to lead to liberation of human being will be more liberated. Remember, this was also the era of existentialism, when existentialism was sprouting up, it's coming out. The great work of Viktor Frankl and the existential thinkers like Kafka, Wertheimer, and many more, which Kierkegaard was the another name, or Nietzsche was considered to be their background philosopher, which was basically after seeing the mass scale death and destruction caused by the Second World War, the first question that's coming to, what is the meaning of a life? What is the meaning of being a human? Admi ki औकात क्या है? If I translate into what is the worth of an individual? People are dying right, left, and center. The similar, almost close to parallel situations when we saw in the peak of the second wave of corona in the April end and the May. What is the meaning of it? You find that most of us in our own relational network, in our own familial network, there has been casualty. So raises the question, what is the meaning of this kind of a life? And how the present arrangement of regulation, political life, and other kind of things, and particularly the way organizations are collapsing. And this era has reminded me as an organizational scientist that the contemporary era is visualizing the erosion of organizational life. We had created organization also under the belief that individual can fail, but organizations will not fail. But we have realized that perhaps this is not true. So what are we observing? The first point that I was trying to bring forth to your attention, your own observational capacities. The example from the classic work I'm giving, the Chris Argyris, right, who was a very celebrated theorist in organizational behavior. He observed certain kind of things happening. He said that though the slogan is said that the war will lead to liberation, but people experiences are suggesting that no, we are more constrained than feeling liberated. The current scenario and the combination of it with the existential thinkings, right? So people started making efforts, right? Many members tried to make efforts that situation circumstances change, but we all got indulged into what he refers. Chris Argyris uses a word that how the power of observation always helps you to do that. He said that I found that most of the managers and practitioners are engaged skillfully into self-defeating activities. Right? And then how do we account for these kinds of experiences? He almost dedicated himself and his career for understanding, and this was coming out of the power of his observations. What kind of things are happening at that particular point of a time into the history. So power of observation is very critical, and that's what many scholars later on, they said that if you really want to build a powerful theory, you cannot do it without engaged scholarship. So the new term is being thrown into the fray, and that's called the engaged scholarship. What is the engaged scholarship? That we'll talk about it a bit later. But let's look at these 4 stages, and I was referring to the term observation. Observation, that what kind of observation you have about the phenomenon. Second very important stage is that what kind of formulation of explanation for such phenomena is using, what kind of inductive processes are being used. And that's what I see a value of the qualitative research, what kind of inductive process are induced into explaining a phenomena. If I'm explaining, how do we enter into? So I have one experience, and how do I see that it can lead to different kind of experiences. Third very important step is generation of predictions or hypotheses. What kind of hypotheses we generate based on this phenomenon? Like, take for example, if I have to ask this question to you, that what has caused the organizational failure into the last decade? Organizations, you can think of any possible organization, whether you take the Arjoinis classification, maintenance organizations to the growth organizations, what kind of things have taken place? What has caused the collapse and failure of these organizations? If you have to create a hypothesis, if you want to understand, then what kind of hypothesis can be generated, right? Then here we use the deductive process to generate a hypothesis. And once we are generating a hypothesis, then finally, the final step is the verification of these hypotheses or hypothesis testing. These are the theory building size. Contrary to this, there is a very interesting observation made by Carroll. Lewis Carroll is the one thinker who has said that. He said hypothesis is a navigational map. It is the charting out the territory where you have to travel. He said if you don't know where you are going, any road will lead you there. But that's not the theory building, and that's not the theory testing. There is a very designful, conscious, by planning, you are entering into observing a phenomena. This is the first, and you have seen enough evidences for observing the phenomena. Take, for example, the example that I'm taking, failure of the organization income. This is my thought. Whether you look at the health system, whether you look at the delivery system, whether you look at the judiciary system, whether you look at the educational system, I find that their performance is far from satisfactory. So I have a reason to say. So first question that comes to my mind, that whether these organizations in its present formulation have lost their esteem, has lost their value, and they are no longer. We will have to think of creating and designing new forms of organization into the changing times. So one, what kind of explanation I'm giving, and I'm questioning their entire organizational structure, the power dynamics, the leadership process, their visioning, missioning, all kind of process. I'm saying that they seems to have lost their value. So this kind of explanation I'm giving. This is the second step of building a theory, formulation of an explanation. What kind of explanation I'm offering to the phenomenon by an inductive process. So I am, based on 1-2 observations, I'm spreading it out, inducing it into explaining other kind of a situation, other kind of organization. The third, of course, generation or generating, how do we generate the hypothesis, or how, in what way, what kind of answers I am giving to it, right? So I say that, well, because the organizations, particularly those organizations which do not have a sense of ownership. So private organizations which have a sense of ownership, either by a person or by a board or by the stakeholders, shareholders, those organizations with the ownership, sense of ownership, have been able to arrest their deterioration a bit more in comparison to those organizations where the ownership is confused. Public sector organizations where the ownership is slightly confused and there is no owner of this. Now, this is the one kind of hypothesis which I am formulating. Now, I will have to next step verification of the data, that am I going to collect data, verify, so that I can do it under more control conditions. More control I'm able to bring in my observations, the better confidence I will get in making certain conclusions. So this is the verification kind of a process. So these are the different kind of the more observations I include in my verification process, the more phenomena I encompass gather in my verification process, the greater possibility of generalization I will be creating. More generalization I create, more applicability I create, there would be greater acceptability of this particular theory, and then possibility of bringing that will be able to predict certain kind of a phenomena. So if I have to change certain things here based on this hypothesis, I'm just giving a very hypothetical example. I say that even in the public sector, you create ownership. So if you want public sector to do, so you create ownership to the people, right? That their day-to-day activities, their future, their well-being will get directly affected by the performance of the organization. They can't just pass on everything to the government, everything to the somebody else, right? To the public, because public is a very diffuse kind of entity. And if you are able to do it, then again I will have to follow the same process of hypothesis generation, data collection, and the verification, and then only perhaps I will be able to do that. Now, what kind of process I follow in the verification, you all know, and you must have studied in your research method. It can be done by naturalistic observation. You can conduct surveys, you can plan a field study, you can plan a field experiment, or you can have a laboratory experiments, right? Laboratory experiments where cause and effect relationship are better established, and once we have antecedent and consequences clearly demarcated for their connections, then the better chances of predicting our would be. So these are, the more rigor we bring, the more rigor we increase, there is a robustness of theoretical formulation will improve. That's the idea. And these are the four, how when we are evaluating the research design, it's very important that we look into certain kind of a criteria for theory building. When we are trying to build a theory, the organizations, first, what is the method of assessment that we have chosen? Method of assessment. I'm using the word assessment, right? Assessment and measurement, there is a difference, right? Assessment is more of estimation, and measurement, when you assign numbers to a particular estimation, then that's the measurement that we talked about. Second important, what is the degree of control over the process and over the overall situation? So degree of control, more degree of control you will have, there is a better research design you will create. And that's what the scientific experimentation, which are done into the laboratory conditions, they exercise better control. They control time, they control their input, they control their observations, and they try to subject it more to the instrumentation to do that, right? The qualitative measure may be useful for generating future hypotheses, right? But quantitative is necessary for rigor, right? So what kind of a qualitative quantitative combination that you do it, and finally what kind of a causal relationship, the more rigor you apply, there is a greater degree of causality we will be able to establish into that, and the greater causality we are able to establish, there is a greater generalizability we would be bringing about into that. That's the kind of a thing. Now this was the first part, that what are the process. So we started moving from tenacity to intuition to authority to the science. These are the various steps which are leading to certain kind of formulations to do that. There is a very good amount of common sense theories which are coming out of the people tenacity, particularly in the world of business, and they have brought certain kind of a success. You must have heard the stories of Apple and the Google, how two different kind of a cultural matrix of their leaders, right? The Apple is extremely secretive about the product, about the project. So if 5 people are working on a project into different departments, right, they are not talking to each other unless it has been taken to certain critical stage of development in the Apple. But if you go to the Google, everything is kept transparent, fluid. sharing and communicating, both have achieved their successes. So they have a reason to get guided by it. But it is coming out of the same kind of tenacity of their leaders. So tenacity, intuition, authority, and then finally doing science. Science is the one general way, and science where it is a more observation, objectivity, fact checking, verification, measurement, rigor, and control. Then only you would be able to engage into that kind of a thing. However, in the organizational behavior sciences, that's the second and the last part of my talk, which is saying that, and there is a one author, which is a name is Nielsen. Nielsen has, which is saying that in the OB researches, the best theoretical formulation comes out of engaged research. That's the engaged scholarship that he talks about. And the engaged scholarship or the engaged research is very important. Is able to fulfill the gap between theory and practice. Right? There are three kinds of things which are being often labeled against the OB researchers into what? One, they say that OB research, the problem of theory casualty or theory building is that translating and diffusing relevant knowledge to practice. This is the one reason that why there is a huge gap between theory and practice. So to answer this question, Nielsen is saying that we have to have engaged research or the engaged scholarship, engaged knowledge activity. Because the first problem that's been identified is that we have a theoretical formulation, but we don't know how to translate and diffuse this relevant knowledge to the world of practice. Academicians working in I have faced this acquisition time and again on my journey to the organizational world or to the corporate world. Often he say that Professor साहब ये आपकी क्लास नहीं है, ये theory नहीं है, practice की बात करिए. So often we say that we fall short of translating certain theoretical formulations to solving a practice-related problem. This is the one. Second problem which is being faced, which is being experienced, and thus being talked about, is the knowledge-practice gap. Right? Is as a distinct kind of a knowledge. Some scholars here, particularly, they want to maintain this kind of a gap. They maintain. He said that ideal and practice must be maintained separately. If the ideal become the practice, then we will lose out the lamppost. Like a ship need a lamppost, right, to chart out its navigational directions. So if we are not having the ideals, right, then we will not be able to evaluate our practices. So they deliberately maintain the gap between the knowledge and the practices. The knowledge and practice gap must be maintained, right? The third say that the gap between the knowledge and practice is due to knowledge production problem. Means since things are changing, and which is called the in biological sciences, this is called the EP biology. And let me give an example, which is I think can be extended to OB sciences as well. You can ask this question that biological sciences are relatively better science. So I asked this question to one of my zoology friends. I have a number of friends in the Department of Zoology in Delhi University. So I said that when that there's a person who's a cell biologist. So I asked him that when you take out a cell from the human body and put it under the microscope for investigation, what is your confidence level that the cell inside the body behaves in the same way as under the microscopic lens? If blood flowing into the veins, we go to the pathologist to get our blood and urine and other kind of thing tested. But blood as a flowing reality in my veins, does it behave in the same way with same kind of a chemical composition as it is taken out into the syringe and put into the test tube? Or does it change its characteristics because it is taken a life out of it? So the answer is that these issues are called the issues of EP biology. say that we are aware of this kind of a thing, and what is the emergent characteristics. Now, if I extend without going into the biology, because that's not my area of study, I just learned from my interaction with the friends. The gap is due to this kind of emergent phenomena and the knowledge gap. I study phenomena today, and after some time, I find that the entire character has undergone a certain kind of a change because of the emergent realities, because of the realities coming up into that. And you say this gap will always be there between the knowledge domain and the world of practice. World of practice is situated into time and space zone. Look here. Time and space zone. Time is changing. The spatial arrangements are also changing. The actors within the situation is also changing. And as a result, the practice demand a different kind of diffusion of knowledge than actually a simple-minded extrapolation of knowledge into the world of practice. The simple straight line extrapolation of knowledge will not add value to the quality of practice. And therefore, we must take into account the emergent factor of a reality, and they say that the only way it can be addressed, and that's the Nielsen's viewpoint, only way it can be addressed is by the engaged scholarship. If the engaged scholarship is that in which researcher and practitioner co-produce knowledge that can advance theory and practice in a given domain. And in the Western world, I am yet to come across any such arrangement in Indian context. But in Western arrangement, this is quite a regular practice that people acting as a vice president or CEO, take a sabbatical break from their job, come to the university, set up and teach. The university professors at time, and if I remember correctly, and I have read it long back, that the person who gave the concept of competency in the workplace and the competency model, he was basically teaching in that. But prior to that teaching, he was also at a very senior position in one company, one organization. So how this synthesis is being created for building a good theory into the organizational, and they say that this can be achieved by engaged scholarship, in which the researcher and practitioners both coming together and co-creating the knowledge together, and that can advance theory and practice in a given situation. I don't know what possibilities is there that as an OB teacher or as a management teacher, if I'm invited to run a particular kind of organizational setup based into my knowledge. I have tried, but not as a practitioner, but work hand in hand with the practitioner, trying to understand the internal intricacies of reality, which is not enshrined or not given into the books. And certain things which are given into the book are not into the part of the practice. So which one is superior, one is inferior, that's not the debate. But the engaged scholarship will come when the world of practice and the world of knowledge coming together, co-creating, co-producing the knowledge, and that can be done. One of the work of that can be seen in detail, Wandy, when he's in 2007, wrote an autobiographical account of the engaged scholarship, right? And then he tried to look into the challenges, right? That how the field observation, how to appreciate the complexity of a reality, right? How you can involve others and how. So action research model that's being suggested is considered to be more relevant for building a theory. Look into the history of it. You look into the history of organizational development into the organization, right from national testing, training laboratories, the NTL, or the initial efforts of Hawthorne and Elton Mayo's work into that, or the scientific management, or the Weber's theoretical formulation. They were born out of certain level of engaged scholarship, because these people were given the challenge of handling a real life situation with their repositories, with their repertoire of knowledge, fully loaded with their concepts, variables, and the tools, and somehow they could produce certain kind of a theoretical formulation, which later on became a part of the textbook, and we all were, learning and knowing about it. That's where it was being done, right? This is the very important part of. So we say that the theory building in the organizational behavior is to be done. It can be done better, and this is one of the views by engaged scholarship. If I'm using organizational data only for doing my research, this will serve a very limited purpose. This will serve a very limited purpose for the researcher or for the practitioner, but it is not going to fulfill all the requirements of building a theory which can be subjected to verification, subject to generalization, universalization, the characteristic of the theory. So, and the one example of Chris Argyris I gave to you, that how he developed in his own understanding, right, the reality with the knowledge system about post Second World War, right, and then he tried to look into this phenomenon and finally able to do it, right. This say that used, and the famous formulation of double loop learning of Chris Argyris, if you want to read in greater detail. They say that the since the status of understanding, the status of reality is changing into the world of practice, right, on a much more faster speed in comparison to the reality that researcher outside experience. This the status quoist understanding will remain reality. We often end up doing a status quoist research which has already been known to us, which is common to all to do that, and it will not lead to any kind of a grand and the good theory building, right? The similar example of the Hirschman, which was who got his PhD at the age of 23, right? And he's basically PhD in economics, and he was studying certain organizations in Nigeria, and his very famous book, Exit, Voices, and Loyalty, right? Response to decline in firm organization and states is a very famous book of Hirschman. If you want to read, you can find that how his understanding that the he was studying the rail transport organization and trying to the challenge was that how it can be made more effective to do that. Similarly, the famous rice mill experiment into Ahmedabad, very famous, which is another example of the which brought forth the socio-technical systems into organizations. Say that the organizations are not only open systems, organizations are not closed systems, organizations are not cybernetics or any kind of understood, but rather they are more socio-cultural systems. And what has happened into that in Ahmedabad in the early, what's it called, the famous Ahmedabad rice mills, Ahmedabad study, that Indian workers who are working into these mills, textile mills, when they go to their villages on their yearly vacations, they generally go on a month vacation or 15-day vacation, but they often end up extending their vacation time again and again, right? So they were very interested in studying that how this phenomena can be studied. They know job would be important, so socio-technical system was born. So the point here I'm going to make is that if you want to be doing a good theory building, it can only be achieved by engaging into the through the engaged scholarship. If you have a questions here, I would like to take. Otherwise, I will be making my concluding statements about this. Any question?
So will you be sharing some kind of pointers or a study material or a kind of, like you have mentioned, a lot of
I can send you the
research
references.
scholars. Yeah, some references to
I
go
can
through.
send you the references. That's what for a researcher, the researchers who are there here, particularly those faculties who are working for their PhD research. I would like to share with them certain kind of reading that's how they can make their research more robust and publishable, at least into some good journals. That's very important, because as a reviewer of the many journal articles that comes to me, I often find that the conceptual framework is a serious casualty. So how to think of a conceptual framework when you are doing research in OB? I can give more example from OB in comparison to other. Yes, Swati Jha.
Yes, sir. So just wanted to understand more on this. That's why I asked for some reference materials to read through, so that whatever we have learned.
What do you want to know more? Please say it again.
So about the topics you have covered, qualitative research versus quantitative research, or maybe how the basically the leftist and the rightist viewpoints or stages of theory building, as a in detail, some kind of research papers where we can go through. That's fair.
Okay. That references I'll give. First, I think as a researcher, it's very important to anchor yourself in certain kind of knowledge tradition. Is the first. So even if you think of it doing research, right? Take the research where it sounds like a philosophy. Remember, all the degrees of the higher knowledge, they are called philosophies, whether you do DPhil, MPhil, or PhD. So I often ask this question: why they are called philosophy? Even if I'm doing in science, I'm doing in commerce, I'm doing in management, or I'm doing in arts, why they are called philosophy? One question. So philosophy refers to the level of abstraction you bring in your thinking. So if I have taken a knowledge where it sounds like a philosophy, like a broad generalizable abstraction, then I am worthy of, if I am worthy of attaining that, then I am also worthy of my degree. So first very important point, that good research, most of the research you will find, good research, the criteria that I already discussed, has to be based on certain kind of assumptions, certain kind of philosophical propositions, right? And these philosophical propositions are coming from your own alignment with the theory. Which kind of a theory you subscribe to? You want to, whether you are working into the area of behavioral economics, whether you are working into the area of commerce or organizational behavior or XYZ, anyone. What is the theoretical formulation or the theoretical anchors that you have created for yourself? So are you anchoring into that? Right? This is the one. Second thing is that what is the question that I want to answer? Because more often than not, these theoretical presuppositions, or another word which is being used by Shaw and Costin, your theoretical four structures. Your theoretical four structures help you formulate your problem in a particular way. Then what kind of hypothesis raised and how you are going to test that hypothesis. If you do not have able to frame a hypothesis, are you going to go into the qualitative research? I have supervised at least have supervised 15 to 20 qualitative research paradigm PhDs. On the total number of PhDs, close to 35. And I found that we are often searching a phenomena for which there are no testable propositions available, and therefore we decide that, okay, we'll first try to go for a qualitative research, and maybe once the qualitative research is being done. So what is the question that you wish to answer? You already have thought about that you are going to see a relationship between two kinds of variable, that what is a relationship between intelligence and success, something like that. So you have already known the concept of intelligence, you know the notion of a success. But suppose I turn this question into another way, and that's the one PhD I supervised. One student got interested that how do we know that notion of a success is the same in men and women? Do women also see their success in the same way as men see? And she was feeling very strongly about it. And she wanted to understand, and guided by the belief that the notion of a success in a culturally loaded context like India, where there are very different kind of rules and practices and forms, there are only policies about the gender equity and gender equality, but the cultural practices are very different. different. Now you can see that her own philosophical understanding is coming, and she didn't want to go by the general idea that the success mean the same to men and women. So she said that I cannot do it with survey research or a questionnaire research. I will have to collect the stories and the narratives of the women who are rated as successful, and I want to understand their lived experiences of success in their life. So selected managers working in the organization, particularly middle and the above level of the managers, what their life story is all about. And she came out with a very different kind of formulation, that the success for women is different from the success for men, right? In terms of the priority. And she came out with the new formulation. So what I'm trying to say, that if you are posing a question which demand investigation into a particular direction, that I am more interested in knowing your stories as a person, right? And then actually looking for a very generalized phenomena occurrence, then I am going to more into the qualitative research. So everything is decided by the nature of a question that you have, and then followed nature of a question will decide that what kind of method would be taken it up. So method choices would be decided by that. This is the one. And I will certainly share a few readings that I have into this, that how to formulate a problem, which problem is more suitable for qualitative research and which is for the quantitative research. When you are going to the quantitative research, nonetheless, the theoretical formulations and the theoretical baggage is critical for both, whether you do qualitative, whether you do quantitative. In both, your own anchorings, your own grounds must be known and must be tentatively worked out, so that it has to be viewed from somewhere. You want to see something, but from where you are seeing it, that's an important. Where you are seeing Delhi from a helicopter, or you are seeing Delhi by 13th floor of Lee Meridian, or you are seeing Delhi, right, from the Chandni Chowk, or you are seeing Delhi from the SRCC college. The view of Delhi will depend from where you are viewing it. And that's the Nagel suggests as the philosopher of science. I have not deliberately avoided referring to the Karl Poppers and the other formulation, which is in the falsifiability principle of Karl Poppers. We say that, which is saying that your hypothesis must be falsifiable. Means if it is not true, can it be untrue? And this falsifiability principle of Karl Poppers is very important. Unfortunately, in social sciences, and particularly in behavioral sciences, this falsifiability is not very clearly established. And that is why most of the philosophers of science, like Kuhn, Popper, or Feyerabend, they don't consider these scientific disciplines as a paradigmatic science. He say that they are still at the pre-paradigmatic stage, where their own paradigms are not well formulated, and they will have to work hard to create their own paradigm of viewing it. So there's another kind of a debate that can take into it. So few readings I will certainly share, and I will say to the organizers of this seminar, who will distribute it after this session is over. The final and the concluding points that I wish to bring to your notice is that the theoretical modeling by the mathematical means, which has been considered the most necessary step for theory building in the organizations, they are seldom taught in the organizational behavior classes. This is the one. So if you really want to pay more attention to the theory building and sensitize researcher to anchor their research in certain kind of a conceptual formulation, I think the first thing that needs to be done is to bring these computer simulation and mathematical modeling into the realm of their teaching. That's the very important point. Second point is the philosophical work, the nature of science, right? What is the nature of the science, and what is the principle of falsifiability, or what is the difference between fact and truth, which we often brush aside as a philosophical subject, but I think they formulate the core of research activities. And we rarely pay attention to these kinds. So what is the difference between fact and truth? How they are important. What I am referring to is my truth, or it is something, a fact which can be checked by anybody else. So certain element of philosophy of science, where you are studying the meaning of a paradigm, you are understanding the way of looking at it, right? There is a very interesting book by Feyerabend, which is called the Against Method. There is another philosopher, Thomas Kuhn, whose book is The Structure of Scientific Knowledge. That what is the scientific knowledge and how it can be done? Why science is becoming the most powerful institutions, currently. Even if you have to prove a Vedic point, a traditional point, a cultural point, we often refer that now it has been scientifically found very valid that, doing this, doing a kind of or mantrachar or yogic activities changes your brain structures, even if they will have to take the help of the science. So science becoming such a powerful institution, it is very important, particularly into the research practices of teaching and education. Certain element of philosophy of science is also brought into the curriculum and taught to the students. We are doing in Delhi University in psychology department, we have been doing these kinds of things so that our sensitivity to the students about the theories and the practices of science is improved and made better. I'm not saying that we have achieved the much breakthrough and progress, but at least we have initiated, doing kind of a thing. This has seriously hampered the theory building exercises into the organizational behavior or into the social sciences. This is the one, right? So what is happening into that we are basically inventing the wheel again and again. How phenomena relate with each other and what it tells. This is what we are doing in most of the researches, right? Because in absence of a strong theory, we cannot identify, right, the most effective interventions. If you have to change, OB say that it must solve a problem, but unless we have a theoretical formulation, we cannot identify a phenomena that can be effectively changed, right? And finally, our own obsession, I would call it, though I'm using a strong word, obsession, but our own approach, a hypothetical-deductive method, hypothesis testing, is a major concern. Even you look at the PhD viva on the examiners, or I sit into DRC meetings of the various institutions, most of the experts asked that you have not proposed hypothesis, or hypothesis testing is not good, but this is one of the approaches, hypothetical-deductive, and this is not the all of doing the approach. And it is a deeply ingrained, particularly in behavioral sciences, hypothesis testing. I can proceed even without a hypothesis because I am doing something very inductive. I'm doing based on certain kind of a qualitative research, and I don't know that how ultimately two variables, two phenomena, two experience, two events will get related to. Only after doing a bit of exploration, maybe perhaps I would be in a position to propose something. Therefore, the lack of collective coordination program is also causing, right, a damage to the theory building process. We are not coordinating. I have been part of ISSR review that what kind of researches are being done in OB, and we have compiled chapters and books and other kind of things. But I find that despite this compendium of the research available, very few researchers refer to those kinds of articles which are published in ISSR volumes, where they talk about the state of the knowledge, the way it has been done. And every 10 years time, ISSR takes up this kind of exercise, and it is not being referred, generally fine, right? Finally, we are not training our scholars to develop a skill conducive to theory development. This is the one reason. That what are the skills necessary for developing a particular kind of a theory, right? And because we live into the norm, into the academic world, where the final norm is of hypothesis testing. So I've tested hypothesis, and that's the most powerful norm. And if I have, and we need a theory construction methodology. We need to teach a course on theory construction methodology, right? And the scientific inquiry. These are very, I say that there are only two steps of doing that. One, the empirical phenomena is detected and explained by theory that are built to understand them, right? Now, how phenomena, data, theory, and other kind of things are given into it. I don't have to, tell you. You all would be knowing, and that would be perhaps taking you to the another realm, that how the phenomena, what is the meaning of phenomena, what is theory, and what is data. These basic things should be very clear when you are entering into the research. Particularly, often ask the question that what is the difference between fact and truth. So we often get confused about it. But in you are doing a scientific theory building exercise, I think these terminologies, these variables carry certain kind of connotation and a meaning, and they must be used with the similar meaning. Otherwise, we would be violating the law of parsimony, which is one of the very cardinal formulation, very cardinal rules of doing a science. We do what is needed, what is required, and we do only with a particular meaning. It should not suffer from the surplus meaning. That's the kind of a science we are doing. I would take halt here, and if there are questions, you can raise it, and then I can say thank you very much.